Paper 2, Edexcel 2019. Let's get started. Of course, the macroeconomics paper. Let's get started with this section A. So we're given a bit of a graph. Let's dive into what is happening with this question. So, which of the following is most likely to cause an increase in credit card lending? So the graph here is showing us monthly additions to UK credit card lending. So it's showing us how much is being added to UK credit card lending. What am I focusing on here? 2015, 2017. So if this was around 2008, I'd have different ideas. But yeah, so what's the question asking? So which of the following is the most likely to cause an increase in credit card lending? A fall in interest rates, I would say yes. Why falling interest rates? Of course, you want to increase lending, you want to increase consumption. An increase in investment, that would be wrong, as investment is by firms. It doesn't really have anything to do with credit card lending, which is more consumer based. C, an increase in the deficit on the current account balance of payments. That's due to the outflows and inflows in the country. Again, has nothing to do with credit card lending. So savings, of course, an increase in savings. Of course, savings are the opposite of borrowing. So for that one, I'll be correct. So yeah, therefore, I would say my answer here would be A, a fall in interest rates. Of course, an example of expansion monetary policy, where fall in interest rates is usually accompanied by an increase in credit card lending. Why? Of course, you want to increase the, and of course, fall interest rates, of course, classic example of expansionary monetary policy. But let's keep going and let's go to this 2-mark question now. So using the chart, calculate an index number. So that's interesting. So good little math skill there. So calculate an index number for the additions to credit card lending in March 2017 using January 2016 as the base. Your advice, show your workings. So let's get these numbers off this diagram. So let's first get started with March 2017. That is, as we can see, it is 15 billion. So I'm just going to 15,000 billion, it looks like. Then what is the base year? And of course, how do you work out the index number? You do the year they're given you divided by the base year, which we said was January 2016, which is here, which is 13,000. Now what we're going to do to this, I'm just going to times it by 100, and that should give me my answer. Let's slap that in my calculator. That has given me 115.38, so I'm just going to round that up to 4, and that would be very simply, that's literally taking me 30 seconds to pick up those 2 marks, and we keep going now. As long as you know what index numbers are, very easy marks there. And remember, it's an index number, there's no units needed, no pounds, nothing like that. But now, anyway, to finish off this question 1, the last 2-mark question, explain one possible link between an increase in credit card lending and the rate of inflation. That sounds really easy. How are we going to link that together? An increase in credit card lending, of course, is going to lead to an increase in consumption. Whereas more consumption is a component of AD. It's going to lead to AD shifting out, and you can even say demand pull inflation, as when AD shifts out, it pulls up demand, therefore pulling up price level. That's a very simple and very quick, easy 5 marks. Let's keep going now to the question 2. So it looks like we have another diagram. We have a diagram question here for 4 marks. Draw an AD and AS diagram to show the likely impact of an increase in government spending on infrastructure on a country's price level and real output. Let's get started by labeling up this diagram. Of course, price level on the y-axis, real GDP on the x-axis. So government spending is a component of what? Of course, government spending is a component of AD. If we look at the formula, C plus I plus G plus X minus M. If there's an increase in government spending, of course, there's going to be an increase in AD. So what we're showing on this diagram, we are quite literally just showing a shift out of AD. Very simple and very nice 4 marks here. So AD, and then of course, I'm going to draw an SRAS in this scenario, and then just AD shifting outwards to AD1, and what the mark's going to be for. And of course, let's label up our equilibriums. So PLE, that's going to be our original one, and YE, and then we have our new equilibrium, of course, Y1, and then PL1. I'm just going to show an increase in price level and also an increase in real GDP, and that is more than enough, and that is all you need for 4 out of 4 marks, and literally that can get done in about 30-40 seconds, which is really good and really positive for you to surplus on the other questions. So let's keep going to the last bit of this question 2. Which of the following would be an example of government spending on infrastructure? And it says infrastructure, so an increase in construction work on new railway lines, that is infrastructure, and that is government spending. So I'd say that is correct, but let's have a look at the other ones. Interest payments on national debt. This would actually be transfer payments just to people who they owe, so that would not be an example of government spending on infrastructure. Of course, C is salaries to teachers. This would be government spending, but what type of government spending is this? This is current spending, so them just upkeeping, and of course it's not on infrastructure, therefore it is not C. And then D, unemployment benefit payments. This of course is actually not technically government spending. This is again just transfer payments, therefore the answer would be A. And let's keep going, and that's how to get 5 out of 5 marks there. And let's keep going to this question 3. So Explain question. One likely reason for Estonia's unit labour costs rising faster than in other European countries. And then in the table we see that Estonia's unit labour costs are relatively higher than other countries. And it's using 2010 as the base year. So let's think about some reasons behind why this occurs. What does unit labour cost actually mean? It's the cost per producing one unit of output. So if Estonia's cost per output is higher than France, what could that be due to? And of course, the first thing that comes to my mind is due to low productivity. Why does low productivity lead to high unit labor costs? As low productivity means there's less output per unit time, and if there's less output per unit time, it means more time is needed. It takes more time to produce the same level of output as France. For example, it may take France 3 hours, but it may take Estonia 3.75 hours. Therefore, as it takes longer, it's more costly. So that's pretty much what I'd write. Low productivity, low levels of output, and means it takes longer to produce, meaning that the costs are going to be higher. So let's keep going now to the second part of this. So another explain question, another 2 marks. Explain why Estonia's competitiveness could be affected by rising unit labour costs. If the unit labour costs are rising, it means it's more costly to produce goods. And very simply, if it's more costly to produce goods, it's going to lead to a decreased level of competitiveness for the Estonian economy. As why they're less competitive, as for example, if them versus France are producing the same goods, and France's, as the unit labour costs are lower, it means France's goods are going to be cheaper, whilst Estonia's are more expensive, thus meaning Estonia is less competitive than France. So that's how I would put it into words. Rising unit labour costs will lead to higher costs for goods. This will lead to decreased competitiveness on global markets, as Estonia's goods will be relatively more expensive than the other countries. Like for example, one of the ones in the table was Austria. But let's keep going, and that's how to get 2 marks there. Let's keep going with this last multiple choice question. So the increase in Australia's unit labour costs between 2010 and 2017 is... So how do we work this out? Let's use the table. The table tells us the index number is 113 and the base year is 100. So how would we work this out? We do 113, take away 100, then we would divide it by 100, times it by 100, which would then give us, as we can expect, 13, which is of course the answer. 13% is how much Australia's unit labour cost rose between 2010 and 2017. So that's how to get 5 out of 5 marks there. And let's keep going to the next question, which is question 4. So this would be an example of, let's read the stimulus. The UK government is planning to cut the corporation tax, so a decreasing taxes. What does that sound like straight away? It sounds like fiscal policy. What type of fiscal policy does that sound like? It sounds like expansionary. Why is it expansionary? As we're trying to, if we're cutting tax rates, we're trying to encourage things like spending, we're trying to encourage things like investment, therefore we're trying to expand the economy. But yeah, the UK is planning to cut corporation tax rates on all pre-tax profits of companies to 17% by 2020. This would be an example of, and so is it monetary policy? No. Is it an exchange rate policy? No. Is it an expansionary monetary policy? No. Remember, I have just said is expansionary fiscal policy, but now there's no selection for expansionary fiscal policy. But that would therefore mean the answer is D. But why is it a supply side policy? As even though fiscal policy is a demand side policy, it could also be a supply side policy. So it depends what the UK's main aim is. If the UK's main aim is to affect the demand side of the economy, so affect AD with this strategy, we would therefore call this policy expansionary fiscal policy. But the UK's main aim with this policy, it looks like, is to affect the aggregate supply of the economy. Therefore, we could call this a supply side policy. That's a really good test of content knowledge, and it's a really good example to explain that. So hopefully that made sense. But yeah, let's keep going to the next question, which is a 2-mark question. So if a company makes 500,000 in pre-tax profit in 2020, calculate how much corporation tax they will pay. Assume the government cuts the rate of corporation tax as planned. So it said they're going to cut the corporation tax rate to 17%. So essentially we're just working out 17% of 500,000. And that, as you can see, would give us £85,000. Make sure you give it, and that is enough to get 2 marks there. And let's keep going and let's finish this question off. Another 2-marker. Explain one possible reason why the revenue from corporation tax could increase if the government cuts the rate of tax. Of course, what explains this concept is this diagram here. It is the Laffer curve. What's the main mistake students make on the Laffer curve? Labeling the axis. Remember, it's tax revenue on your y-axis and tax rate on your x-axis. And why? So let's answer the question. Why the revenue from corporation tax could increase if the government cuts the rate of the tax? So I'm going to explain it using label this A and label this B. But what does the Laffer curve actually show? When tax rate gets too high, basically people try to avoid tax. They maybe don't work as much, or they use strategies like offshoring their bank accounts to try to avoid that tax. Therefore, if they cut the tax rates, it's going to lead to less tax avoidance. Therefore, it could actually lead to an increase in tax revenue. But yeah, essentially just put that into words. So we move closer to the optimum, so we move from B to A. And why is that? As there's less tax avoidance when you decrease the tax rate. Let's finish off the section A with this question 5. 2 more question. Explain the distinction between income and wealth. Great content knowledge question here. So what is income? Income is very simply, it's just the flow of money, you could say, received each year. A great example of income is things like salaries, things like wages. Then what is the distinction between income and wealth? Income, the way I define wealth, is the sum of all your assets. It's the sum of the value of all your assets. Value / sum of your assets. Of course, in the end, your income does become your wealth if you do save it. And it's quite a specific question, and I understand it could be, to be fair, this question is quite specific, and I do understand that some students could have dropped marks here because how specific these definitions can be. But yeah, let's keep going. 2 more question. Explain one likely reason why global wealth inequality has increased. So what is inequality? Of course, it is the difference between the highest income earners in society and the lowest income earners in society. Therefore, why has that gap got bigger? And our great link for this question is a great YouTube channel for economics within the UK, Gary's Economics. One of the main reasons he talks about with regards to rising income inequality within the UK is rising asset prices. Things like house prices rising, things like the price of stocks rising. Why does that lead to increased inequality? As who owns these assets? Who owns the big houses? Who owns the portfolios of houses? It is the rich individuals. Therefore, the rich get richer, and think about who the ones renting. It's the poor individuals, the low income individuals within society. Therefore, that gap becomes bigger. And that was a massive problem with quantitative easing. What was the main problem with quantitative easing? It led to massive rise in asset prices. So in the end, all that money pumped in the economy, it just led to widening that gap of income inequality within the UK. And we can see that now within the UK. So essentially, I've just said, it just widening that gap between the high and the low income earners. But yeah, let's keep going and let's go to the last question of this section A. So which of the following would most likely reduce a country's Gini coefficient? Of course, if you're reducing the Gini coefficient value, this means there's less income inequality within a country. So an increase in import tariffs, would that reduce the levels of income inequality within the country? No. As now importing goods may be more expensive, therefore you could actually say it increases the levels of income inequality. Progressive taxes, an increase in progressive taxes, yes, I would say this would decrease a country's Gini coefficient value. Why? Because progressive taxes, of course, are much better than things like regressive taxes and proportional taxes. As of course, progressive taxes are the ideal scenario where, of course, as the next option suggests, a regressive tax would therefore lead to an increase in the Gini coefficient value, whereas more progressive taxes would reduce the Gini coefficient value. Then lastly, an example of regressive tax is VAT. Why is it regressive? As every single person is taxed the same, and if every single individual is taxed the same, it means that individuals from low income households are taxed the same as high income households. And of course, if you think about VAT, a chocolate bar is at £1, 20% of it is 20p. That 20p, it might be 1% of a low income household's total income, whereas a high income household, it might be 0.001% of their income. Therefore, it disproportionately affects the low income households rather than the high income households. But yeah, so the answer for this would be B, and that is how I would finish and get 25 out of 25 on that section A.